Hi, my name is Philippe Desjardins Proulx. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Poiseau Lab at the University of Montreal. And my presentation is titled Logic, Probability, and How to Understand Biodiversity. By the way, if you find this topic interesting, we are looking for grad students. It's difficult, very difficult, to overstate how complex biodiversity is. At the lowest level, we have individuals, each with a unique genome, except clones, I guess. These unique individuals form populations. The populations change through time, that's evolution, another layer of complexity. Populations form communities of different species, resulting in an intricate web of interactions. One species may prey on another, some compete with each other, some are parasites, some form mutually beneficial relationships. All these interactions depend on many factors. Some species will only interact if another species is present or absent. For example, a predator may prefer a prey to another, or they may only interact in some locations. When we add non-living components to these communities, we get an ecosystem. Soil composition, nutrient cycle, the climate, all have an impact on biodiversity. Biodiversity is the most complex thing we know. Here's an example of a food web from mangold.io. On the right side, we see the food web. Each node represents a species. Lines between nodes represent interactions. We have 79 species and more than 1,000 known interactions. But of course, many interactions are missing, plus this is not a static network. Things will be different and new species arrive and some leave. It's important to understand biodiversity because our well-being fundamentally depends on it, but also because of its rapid decline. This is a very conservative graph of how many species are disappearing because of human activity. Understanding biodiversity is not a simple task, both because the subject is inherently complex, but also because it involves ideas from many disciplines. To understand ecosystems, we need ideas from physics, thermodynamics in particular. Chemistry is involved in many processes, from nutrient cycles to our understanding of soil composition. Evolution plays a great role as the source of new diversity, which leads us to mutations and genetics. In short, a lot of scientific knowledge is involved. So, for decades, we've been developing theories to understand biodiversity, and we're making progress. However, the complexity of the subject means theories always offer a fairly narrow perspective on biodiversity. And the question is, how can we connect the dots between all the ideas necessary to understand biodiversity? Lewis wrote an interesting paper on evolution. His point was that evolution was more a system of theories than an actual single theory. And that to fully capture evolution, we will need to formalize our knowledge in some sort of knowledge base. Doing so would allow us to see more clearly how various components of evolution work together. It's even more true for biodiversity since it involves an even more intricate set of components. This is a very small example of how various equations for evolution are related. At the top we have the price equation. It tells how a trait changes in frequency over time using covariance between the trait and fitness. At the bottom left we have the breeder's equation, which is widely used in agriculture. It's based on selection S and narrow sense heritability H2. Heritability is basically how much variation a trait is due to genetic variation between individuals in that population. Now, it doesn't matter if you don't understand all these variables here. The point is that these formulas are all related. There's a clear mathematical relationship between them. Given price equation and a set of assumptions, you can reach breeder's equations. This is what I mean by putting things in their proper context. You can imagine a large web of formulas ranging from physics to chemistry, evolution, community ecology, and how they will all be involved in our understanding of biodiversity. And from an AI perspective, this is a problem of knowledge representation. We need to find a way to encode our scientific knowledge about biodiversity in a way that allows us to see how various components are related to each other. It will allow us to put our knowledge in their context. And for this particular problem, it's not enough to be able to interpret a model. We need at least three things. We want to be able to compactly encode our mathematical theories for biodiversity. I say compactly because you can approximate pretty much every function with lots of things, including neural networks. But what we want is the actual formula, not a giant matrix of parameters that will approximate the formula. we need our representation to understand enough mathematics to see how the theories are related. So in our example before, we could derive Breeder's equation from Price equation, but doing so requires a pretty good understanding of mathematics. The system needs to know how real number works. It needs to understand whether matrix vector multiplication is commutative, whether it's associative. It needs to understand mathematics, basically. Lastly, it must be able to handle the inherent uncertainty associated with biodiversity data. Not all useful formulas in science can be derived from first principles. We'll take a look at a few representations, and I'll grade them using these three criteria and with this scientific emoji-based grading system. One thing we will not discuss in this talk is deep learning. At least we won't mention it beyond this slide, except once, I think. This paper from Google shows how deep learning can help a fairly sophisticated math engine. It's interesting because the problem is formulated in pure mathematics, and deep learning helps figure out how to generate a proof. So deep learning can be a very important intermediate, but the end result is a proof in a clear language. So we'll explore a few knowledge representations to give you an idea of how tricky the problem is from an AI perspective. We'll start with probabilistic graphical models. Here we have an example of a simple graphical model with only 4 nodes. It's taken from a real system called Pathfinder, used to diagnose blood infections. The graph denotes a probability distribution, the nodes are variables, and the lines denote a probabilistic relationship. So probabilistic graphical models are nice because they give you a clear idea of how the variables are related, and also being able to know which variable is independent from which variable simplifies inference and learning. Here we have an example of how to compute a probability given the network. So I love probabilistic graphical models. They are very powerful, but they are rather useless for what we're trying to achieve here. They can provide a probabilistic context to variables, but there's no way to encode mathematical ideas in these graphical models. You can put Price equation on a node and the Breeder's equation on another node, but the graphical model just wouldn't know what to do with them. They're quite adept at handling uncertainty though. So perhaps we should look at the knowledge representation designed to handle mathematical formulas. Context is an important keyword here. We want our system to understand mathematics so it can understand the relationship between scientific theories. In this simple example, we have 2 seemingly similar formulas, but they mean completely different things. Above we have the mass-energy equivalence, and below we have the Breeder's equation. Now, I've built my share of random forest. If you have a table of data and want to learn a random forest from this data, changing the name of a variable will not change anything. If one variable refers to the number of car accidents in Montreal, and you rename it number of scandals in the Trump administration, the algorithm doesn't care. Systems used to reason about mathematics are different because they provide a lot of context to each symbol. In this case, in E equal MC2, C is the speed of light. If somewhere in your system you have another way to formulate the speed of light, you could use it instead of C. That's the power of symbolic systems. Symbols have meaning. Formulas sharing the same symbols are implicitly connected. This is a very old paper, 1956, describing the logic theory machine. What a name. It is often called the first artificial intelligence program and was able to not only prove results from Principia Mathematica, an important book on the foundation of mathematics, but in some cases it found shorter, better proofs than the book's authors. I want to briefly show how systems like this work. In a way, it's much less straightforward than probabilistic reasoning. Here we have a list of inference rules. Basically, delta refers to our current knowledge, either axioms or what is already proven. The string on the right is the name of the inference rule. For example, we have a rule called sim, short for symmetry. The rule reads roughly, if we know that S equals T, we can infer that T equals S. To prove a new result, you must find the right sequence of inference rules. So, given the Price equation, a good set of inference rules, and a sum assumption, you should be able to find a sequence that will prove Breeder's equation. This is an example of a new modern system called Lean. It's based on type theory, a higher order logic, and has been used to formalize a lot of mathematics. In a very deep sense, Lean understands mathematics and mathematical reasoning. This is an example of people using Lean to formalize machine learning algorithms. The hope is that by formalizing them, you can prove important properties and prevent bugs. So, can we use a system like Lean for biodiversity? Yes and no. It can absolutely encode rich mathematical theories and understand mathematics. But it's not built to reason with uncertainty. All scientific theories I can think of have a dual nature. They are partially derived from first principles, so essentially derived from other ideas in science. They're partially derived using knowledge from mathematics and logic, and they're partially derived from observations. It gets particularly tricky in fields like ecology, environmental sciences, or medicine, where you expect even good theories to be wrong sometimes. Lean and other similar systems are designed to reason in a world where everything is either true or false, which is fine for pure mathematics, but not enough for complex domains like ecology, and many other domains like medicine. So there's a reason why modern machine learning is dominated by probabilistic approaches. We're missing something with probabilistic approaches, and we're missing something with purely logical approaches, so maybe we can find a representation capable of doing both. This is an active area of research in artificial intelligence. So let's look at a very simple example. So here we have a logic formula. It says if species X preys on species Y and X is not a parasite, then X is a greater body mass than Y. Now, that's a very simple formula. And it's obviously not true all the time, which is the point. But it's also a genuinely interesting idea. So if you look at food webs, you'll see this rule is very often true. I train a random forest to predict species interactions, and body mass was by far the most important variable. If you look at the components of this formula, we have a few predicates, so prey on, parasite, the greater than sign. They return a true value, so either false or true, and at the end the formula is going to be either true or false. With a probabilistic logic, you can assign a probability that the formula is true or false. It gives the formula a lot more flexibility. There's the notion that we do not expect it always to be true. Then we have fuzzy logic. Fuzziness and probability may look similar. They both involve real numbers in the 0-1 range, but they are quite different. So fuzziness is about degrees of truth. So 0 is completely false, 1 is completely true, and between these two extremes we have nuances of truth. The question, are viruses alive, is a good fit for fuzzy logic. Viruses have some, but not all, characteristics of living organisms. If, for example, they have 4 out of 5 characteristics, you can assign a true value of 0.8 to the statement, are viruses alive? It doesn't make sense as a probability. On the other hand, if you ask whether Macron will be re-elected, he either will or will not be re-elected, so there's no fuzziness. But probability is useful to reason about these questions because we still don't know whether he's going to be re-elected or not. Species interactions tend to be complicated, and as an example, grey wolves eat figs in some places, especially Europe, but not in North America. So you can definitely phrase this as a probabilistic question, but it's a better fit for fuzziness because there's a degree of truth to the statement, grey wolves eat figs. It's not completely true nor completely false. In short, in pure logic, we will be forced to say they do or don't eat figs. But in fuzzy logic, we can assign a true value. For example, if we have 100 populations and find that they eat figs in 42 of them, we could assign a true value of 0.42 to this statement. Fuzzy logic works quite differently from probabilistic logic. While probabilistic logic can only assign a probability to the entire formula, fuzzy logic allows fuzzy predicates. So the prey on predicate now returns a true value in the 0-1 range. And fuzzy logic defines how logical operators work with degrees of truth. Unlike classical and probabilistic logics, we can have more nuanced predicates. So for example, the prey on predicate, which is necessary to handle cases like the grey wolves not always eating figs, is now much more flexible because it can return a value between 0 and 1. Here we have type 2 fuzziness, where the true value itself as a true value, it's often used to model uncertainty about the true value. And it's getting a bit closer to what probability is doing. And again, unlike classical and probabilistic logics, all the predicates benefit from this extra flexibility. To do justice to the full range of applications of fuzzy logic will take more time, but if you're interested, I highly recommend this book. It covers the history of the idea and its many applications. Which leads us to one of two knowledge representations that I think can encode our knowledge about biodiversity. The first one is fuzzy type theory. It's pretty recent but has a strong logical and mathematical foundation. It's based on a logic similar to the one used by Lean, but adds the flexibility of fuzziness. So you can reason about things that are neither completely true nor completely false. It seems to check most boxes. The only problem is, as far as I know at least, nobody has ever implemented it. Fuzzy mathematical logic has seen a lot of development in the last 2 decades, but it remains largely untested in practice. We are working on it though. I'm currently writing an implementation in Rust and will open source it. The second promising representation is higher order probabilistic programming. You may have heard of probabilistic languages like Stan or Edward, but in the last few years we've seen more flexible languages being developed. This is an extract from An Introduction to Probabilistic Programming, an introduction that covers higher order probabilistic programming. The idea is that these new, more flexible languages can define a probability over any function, including a higher order function. This paper defines the foundation of these new languages. So, what makes these languages different from probabilistic graphical models shown earlier? Well, in theory, since they can define probabilities over any language, and systems used to formalize mathematics like Lean are well-defined languages, then the idea is that higher order probabilistic programming could be used alongside something like Lean to combine probabilistic reasoning with formal mathematical reasoning. Plus, unlike fuzzy type theory, we already have many implementations of higher order probabilistic programming. Anglican is the oldest of the three. It's written in Clojure. Turing is a fairly recent one. It's written in Julia. And finally, Uber is developing Pyro, which is using the PyTorch framework, normally used for deep learning. It's written in Python. There's a catch though. As I said, in theory, higher order probabilistic languages can define probabilities over higher order functions, but in practice, nobody has ever used them in conjunction with something like Lean. It's obviously more work. You need to build both the logic engine and the probabilistic reasoning engine. It will also lead to a system that is harder to use, since formal languages like Lean require a good understanding of type theory. That being said, the previous paper seems to prove that it's possible, and again, this is something we are working on. So, where does that leave us? Well, right now we are really good at probabilistic reasoning, and we are really good at mathematical reasoning. But we have yet to figure out a good way to mix the two. It seems important though. Mathematics has this incredible ability to connect ideas and give them context. Systems used to reason about mathematics are just too inflexible to reason about data. But enough progress has been done at the frontier of logic, fuzziness, and probability. So we are likely to solve this problem soon. It's not only important for biodiversity though. Biodiversity is a good example because it involves so many scientific ideas from various disciplines. But it's easy to think of other disciplines where building flexible knowledge bases of interconnected ideas would be beneficial. Pretty much anything involving science will benefit from this. Thank you for listening. I know it's a pretty technical topic, but I hope you learned a thing or two on modern knowledge representation research and how it relates to biodiversity.
Philippe?
Yes.
Thanks for your talk. I did not completely understand it, to be honest, but I saw a lot of I saw a lot of probability and stuff. So I just wanted to ask you, have you considered like using, say, quantum computation for this topic? Since there's a lot of like, do you think it's?
It's pretty interesting. It could be useful perhaps for some problem in logic. And actually there's an approach to unify logic and probability that I taught in my presentation, which is Markov logic. And someone has published a paper on using quantum computers for Markov logic, but I'm not extremely familiar with the subject, so it could be interesting. Maybe it's not going to be interesting, so I guess we'll see. It's a good question.
Hi there, this is Hector. Question, have you looked at causal models in general? Because it seems that you want to do intervention and you want this determinism that you might not model with, it's maybe hard to model with probabilities?
I mean, the problem with are you talking about just a Gaussian model in general or a Gaussian processes?
I'm talking Julia's per causality.
I mean, I'm not really sure how you do mathematical reasoning with this. So, I mean, pure probabilistic models cannot really deal with mathematics the way logic systems like Lean or Coq or Agda can do. So, in my talk, there was an example of you have a mathematical formula, the price equation, and then you have some number of mathematical formulas, and you need to do a certain number of logical steps to reach different formulas. So that's really theorem improving, and I'm not really sure how you could do this with this approach.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? We're all good. Well, thanks, Philippe. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.